Your translator is lying. I said it too loudly. Not loud enough to be brave. Just loud enough to ruin my life. The private dining room at Romano's went still in pieces. First the German men stopped smiling. Then the waiter beside me forgot to pour the wine. Then the man at the head of the table lifted his eyes from the contract, and every other man in the room remembered who owned the air they were breathing. Luca Romano had a pen in his right hand. Black suit. White shirt. No tie. A silver ring on one finger that caught the low amber light every time his hand moved. He did not look like the kind of man who needed to raise his voice. He looked like the kind of man other people lowered theirs for. And I had just interrupted him 3 seconds before he signed a deal worth more money than I would ever see in my life. Victor Hale, the translator, turned toward me with a smile so sharp it felt like a blade laid flat against my throat. "Excuse me," he said. My tray was still in my hands. 4 espresso cups. 1 glass of sparkling water. A folded white napkin over my wrist to hide the burn I got from the kitchen steamer 20 minutes earlier. I could feel my name tag crooked on my blouse. Mara. 5 letters. Cheap plastic. Pinned to a uniform that smelled like coffee, lemon polish, and panic. Victor laughed once and looked around the table like I had spilled soup on myself. "She's confused," he said. "She's staff." The word landed exactly how he meant it to. Staff. Not a person. Not a voice. Not someone who had any business understanding a closed-door negotiation between men with black SUVs waiting outside and bodyguards posted by the hallway. Luca did not move. That was worse. His pen stayed above the signature line, hovering over the paper like the whole room was balanced on the tip of it. "What did you say?" he asked me. My fingers tightened around the tray until the porcelain rattled. Behind him, one of his men shifted closer to the door. The German buyer across the table glanced from Victor to me, confused, then looked down at the contract as if the ink had changed shape. I swallowed. Rent was due Monday. My manager had already warned me that one more complaint from a VIP table would cost me my shifts. And men like Luca Romano did not forgive interruptions from waitresses who made mistakes. But the German phrase was still ringing in my head. Not partnership. Not temporary access. Permanent control. Victor had translated the danger into something harmless and handed Luca the pen. So I looked at the Mafia Boss and said the only thing I could live with. He didn't say what you think he said. Victor took 1 step toward me, and the private room suddenly felt smaller than the walk-in pantry downstairs. "Mr. Romano," he said, still smiling, "I apologize." The girl probably heard a familiar word and invented the rest. The girl. I was 27 years old with a past-due electric bill folded inside my apron, a cracked phone that only charged when the cord sat at the right angle, and a pair of work shoes with cardboard tucked under one sole because the rain had started coming through last week. But in that room, I was the girl. Luca Romano looked from Victor to me. Not soft. Not kind. Just attentive in a way that made lying feel dangerous. "What is your name?" he asked. My throat tightened. "Mara," I said. My manager, Dennis, appeared near the doorway with his face pale and shiny under the sconces. He had that look managers get when they are already deciding who to sacrifice. "Mr. Romano, I'm sorry," Dennis said quickly. "She's new to private service. I can move her back to the main floor." I was not new. I had worked 6 dinner shifts that week, 2 lunch shifts, and 1 clopen that left me brushing my teeth in the employee restroom at 5:40 a.m. I knew which VIPs wanted mineral water without ice, which regulars tipped in cash, and which cooks slammed pans when the ticket printer jammed. I also knew German. Not because I was trying to impress anyone. Because once, before my father's heart failed and the hospital bills started arriving in envelopes thick enough to make my mother cry, I had a scholarship application saved on my laptop for a translation program in Milwaukee. I used to keep a little German dictionary in my backpack with coffee stains on the cover and my name written inside like proof I was going somewhere. Now it sat in my apron pocket, cracked down the spine, pressing against my hip while every powerful man in the room waited for me to prove I had a right to speak. Victor's eyes dropped to that pocket. Then back to my face. "Careful," he said, so softly only I and maybe Luca could hear. "You misunderstand one word in a room like this, and people remember." I understood him perfectly. Not the German this time. The threat. Dennis shifted behind me. "Mara," he warned. That one word carried my rent, my mother's prescription refill, the $312 I still owed the mechanic for keeping my old Honda alive, and the text from my landlord that said we need to talk before Monday. My whole life was balanced on being useful and invisible. And 10 seconds ago, I had stopped being invisible. Luca placed the pen down beside the contract. "Not signed." Victor's smile thinned. The German buyer said something under his breath to the man beside him. I caught only part of it, but it was enough to make my stomach twist. Warum hat das geändert? Why did he change that? Victor turned fast, too fast, and answered them in German before Luca could ask. This time, I heard the lie form cleanly in the air. And Luca Romano watched my face change. Luca Romano's private dining room sat behind a carved oak door most customers never noticed. On the main floor, Romano's looked like an old Chicago steakhouse trying not to brag about itself. Red leather booths. Brass lamps. Framed photographs of men shaking hands with mayors who were either dead or pretending they had never been there. A hostess stand polished so often it reflected your shame back at you. But behind that oak door, everything changed. The carpet was thicker. The glasses were heavier. Even the air smelled different, like cedar, espresso, and money that never had to explain where it came from. Two men stood near the wall without touching their jackets, which somehow made me more aware of what might be under them. Another stood by the hallway with his eyes on Dennis, my manager, as if Dennis were a fly that had wandered too close to the wrong plate. Nobody shouted. That was what scared me most. In my world, danger was loud. A landlord pounding on a door. A cook cursing over a burned steak. A customer snapping his fingers like I was a dog. In Luca Romano's world, danger lowered its voice. Victor reached for the contract as if the interruption were already over. "Let me clarify the language," he said. "This is a standard access clause. Temporary authority during the transition period. Nothing unusual." His hand covered the bottom half of the page. I noticed because servers notice hands. We notice whether a customer is reaching for a wallet or a glass. We notice when someone is about to grab our wrist instead of the check. We notice wedding rings turned inward, empty plates pushed 2 inches too far, men who smile at your face while their fingers tap impatience into the tablecloth. Victor's fingers were not steady. The German buyer, Mr. Adler, glanced at the paper, then at Victor's hand. His mouth tightened. Not anger exactly. More like confusion dressed up for business. Luca saw me looking. "What did he change?" he asked. Victor gave a soft laugh. "She cannot possibly answer that." I still held the tray. My arms had started to ache, but putting it down felt like admitting I belonged there less than the china did. "I heard Besitzcontrol," I said. My accent was not perfect anymore. Too many years without classroom practice. Too many nights learning German from library CDs while my father slept in a recliner because lying flat hurt his chest. But the word came out clean enough. Mr. Adler's eyes moved to me. Victor's smile faded at the edges. "It means control of possession," I said carefully. "Not temporary access. Not supervised access. Control." One of Luca's men shifted his weight. Dennis whispered my name like he could pull it back into my mouth. Victor turned toward him. "Remove her." The order came too fast. Not a request to Luca. Not a suggestion. An instinct. Dennis stepped into the room, and for the first time since I spoke, I felt truly afraid. Not of being wrong. Of being right where no one wanted me to be. Mara, Dennis said, reaching for my elbow, come with me. I looked down. Victor's leather folder sat open beside the contract, its pages marked with neat blue notes. Most of the English lines looked typed and official, but one German phrase had been circled by hand, then softened into something harmless in the margin. Temporary operational cooperation. That was what his note said. That was not what I had heard. Luca followed my gaze to the folder. Victor saw it too. His hand moved, quick and smooth, closing the folder before Luca could reach it. Then he looked at me with all the warmth gone from his face. Waitresses who listen at doors, he said, usually lose more than their jobs. Victor's words traveled farther than he meant them to. The men by the wall heard. Dennis heard. Mr. Adler heard enough to look uncomfortable, even if he missed the insult inside it. Waitresses who listen at doors usually lose more than their jobs. I wanted to say I had not been listening at any door. I had been doing what I was paid to do. Refilling water. Clearing plates. Pretending not to hear men discuss millions while my paycheck depended on tips that came in folded bills and loose quarters. But Victor knew exactly what he was doing. He was not arguing about German anymore. He was turning me into the problem. Dennis's hand closed around my elbow. Not hard enough to bruise. Just hard enough to remind me who made the schedule. Apologize, he whispered. I looked at him. His eyes kept flicking toward Luca Romano, then toward Victor, then back to me like I was a dish he had dropped and could not afford to replace. Say you misunderstood, Dennis breathed. Then go downstairs. My mouth went dry. There were a dozen reasons to obey. The electric bill. The landlord. My mother's prescription waiting at the pharmacy with a price tag I had been pretending not to know. The mechanic who had stopped smiling when I asked if I could pay the rest next week. A good waitress survived by knowing when to disappear. My whole life had become one long lesson in disappearing. Victor opened his folder again, but this time he angled it away from me and closer to Luca, like a magician hiding a trick. Mr. Romano, he said, smooth again, this is exactly why staff should not be allowed in sensitive meetings. She caught one word and built a fantasy around it. It happens. People want to feel important. That one hurt more than the threat. Because it was close enough to something I feared. That maybe I had spent too many years carrying a cracked dictionary like a relic from a life that was over. That maybe remembering another language did not matter when I spent my nights scraping steak sauce off plates and smiling at men who called me sweetheart. My tray dipped. One espresso cup slid against its saucer with a tiny, bright sound. Luca noticed. Not the cup. My hand. The way my fingers shook while I kept my shoulders straight. The way I looked at the contract and not at the money in the room. The way I was terrified, yes, but not uncertain. His eyes shifted to Dennis's hand on my elbow. Let her go, Luca said. Dennis released me so quickly the tray almost tipped. Victor's face hardened for half a second before his smile came back. With respect, he said, you cannot be entertaining this. Luca leaned back in his chair. I am entertaining the fact that she translated one word more clearly than you did. A low discomfort moved around the table. Not silence. Something sharper. The sound of powerful people beginning to doubt the wrong man. Victor felt it too. He turned on me. Fine, he said. If she wants to perform, let her perform. Ask her what the sentence means. The whole sentence. Not one word she picked up from a podcast. Heat crawled up my neck. Dennis looked sick. The bodyguard near the door watched me like my answer might decide whether I left through the front or not at all. Victor's eyes said he had trapped me. Because understanding a word was one thing. Repeating a full business clause in front of Luca Romano, German buyers, and men who treated mistakes like betrayal was something else. My apron pocket pressed against my hip. The cracked dictionary was in there, heavy as a small heartbeat. I could lie and survive the night. Or I could tell the truth and lose everything that made survival possible. I set the tray down on the sideboard carefully, one cup at a time, because my hands needed something honest to do. Then I looked at Luca Romano, not Victor. Ask Mr. Adler to repeat the sentence, I said. Slowly. Mr. Adler looked at Victor first. That told me something. Not enough to prove anything. Not enough to save me. But enough to make my pulse jump once beneath my collar. The German buyer did not look annoyed that I had asked him to repeat himself. He looked nervous about Victor hearing him do it. Luca noticed that too. He said one quiet sentence in English, and the room obeyed it. Say it again. Mr. Adler adjusted his cuff. His wedding band flashed under the chandelier. Then he spoke in German, slower this time, each word landing like a plate set down too carefully. I listened with my whole body. Not just my ears. That was something my old professor used to say before I had to quit school. Translation is not replacing words. Translation is pressure, intention, what a person hides inside grammar. A sentence can wear a clean suit and still carry a knife. Mr. Adler finished. Victor opened his mouth immediately. It means both parties agree to temporary operational cooperation during the transition, he said. As I already explained. No, I said. The word came out before fear could stop it. Victor turned his head slowly. Dennis made a small sound near the door, almost a groan. I felt every tip I needed, every shift I might lose, every overdue envelope waiting at home. My mother's pharmacy receipt was still in my purse downstairs in the employee locker. The inhaler she used when the stairs got bad cost more than my groceries for the week. I could feel the whole fragile math of my life collapsing in real time. But Luca Romano was watching me like the answer mattered more than my uniform. So I kept going. He said the German side assumes full possession control of the port access points once the transfer begins, I said. Not temporary cooperation. Not supervised access. Control. The words changed the room. Mr. Adler looked down at the table. One of Luca's men stopped breathing through his nose. Victor laughed, but this time it sounded patched together. She is oversimplifying a technical clause, he said. German compound phrasing can sound dramatic to amateurs. I'm not being dramatic, I said. I'm being literal. His eyes cut into me. Where exactly did you study German, Mara? A free app? A community class? A few subtitles on your phone? My face burned. The insult worked because it touched the truth from the outside. I did have library CDs. I did have free apps. I had scribbled verb endings on check pads during slow lunch shifts and practiced pronunciation in my car before the battery started dying. I did not have the degree. I did not have the certificate. I had a cracked dictionary in my apron and a life full of almost. Victor smiled wider, sensing blood. You see, he said to Luca. She has no credentials. Luca's gaze did not leave me. Do you need credentials to know the difference between access and control? My throat tightened. No, then explain it. He did not say defend yourself. He did not say prove you are worth hearing. Just explain it. For a second, that gave me enough floor under my feet to stand on. I reached into my apron pocket and touched the spine of my dictionary, not pulling it out, just reminding myself it was real. Zugang means access, I said. Temporary access would use that. Cooperation would be Zusammenarbeit. What Mr. Adler said was Besitzkontrolle. Possession control. And he said Unwiderruflich after the transfer trigger. Luca's fingers closed around the pen. What does that mean? Irrevocable. The German buyer's jaw tightened. That was not a confession. But it was not denial either. Victor moved fast, smoothing his hand across the marked pages in his folder as if the paper itself needed calming. She is cherry-picking words, he said. The final English draft controls. That is standard in international business. Then show him the German note beside it, I said. The sentence slipped out sharper than I intended. Victor went still. Only for half a breath. But I saw it. So did Luca. Because the folder was open just enough for the blue ink to show at the edge. Not all of it. Not enough for me to read cleanly from where I stood. Just the circled German phrase and the softened English beside it, like someone had taken a loaded gun and labeled it kitchenware. Victor closed the folder with 2 fingers. Mr. Romano, he said, voice lower now, this has become embarrassing. Luca looked at the folder. Then at Victor's hand. Then at me. For the first time that night, Victor stopped treating me like a foolish waitress. He looked at me like a loose match near gasoline. Luca Romano did not reach for Victor's folder right away. He looked at it. That was all. But every man in the room understood the difference between noticing a thing and allowing it to disappear. Victor's hand stayed flat on the leather cover. A beautiful hand, I remember thinking. Clean nails. Expensive watch. No burn marks from coffee. No tiny cuts from broken glass hidden under a bandage because taking time off meant losing rent money. His fingers pressed down harder when Luca's eyes dropped to them. Open it, Luca said. Victor smiled as if the request amused him. Of course. But he did not move. The chandelier hummed above us. Somewhere beyond the private door, the main dining room carried on with its normal Friday night music. Forks against plates. A birthday toast near the bar. The low rush of a life where people ordered dessert because they believed tomorrow would be ordinary. Inside that room, ordinary had already left. Victor, Luca said. One word. No threat attached. That made it worse. Victor finally lifted his hand and opened the folder halfway. He angled it toward Luca, not toward me, not toward Mr. Adler, like he could still control what everyone saw if he controlled the direction of the paper. Luca did not touch it. He looked at me. Can you read it from there? I stared at the page. My heart beat so hard I could feel it in my wrists. The blue ink was small, neat, slanted. The kind of handwriting people trust because it looks educated. The circled German phrase sat beside the typed clause, and under it, Victor had written the English version he had been giving Luca all night. Temporary operational cooperation. My mouth went cold. It says what I heard, I said. Victor snapped the folder shut. There, he said. You heard her. She admits she is guessing from a distance. I didn't say guessing. You are a waitress interrupting an international agreement. I'm a waitress who understands the words you changed. Dennis made a sharp sound behind me. Mara, enough. The warning hit like a hand on the back of my neck. Enough meant no job tomorrow. Enough meant my schedule quietly disappearing from the break room wall. Enough meant my mother asking why I was home on a Saturday night, and me pretending my shoes hurt too much to go in. Victor knew that. Men like him always knew where pressure lived. He turned toward Luca. This is exactly how rivals work. They use someone invisible. Someone desperate. Someone no one checks until the damage is done. Desperate. That one found me. Because I was. Desperate for money. Desperate for sleep. Desperate for one person in the world to believe I was more than the uniform they kept snapping their fingers at. But desperation was not the same as dishonesty. Luca's gaze moved to my apron pocket. The little cracked dictionary had shifted upward, its worn blue corner showing above the fabric. I pushed it down by instinct, embarrassed by it, like poverty could be hidden if you were quick enough. He saw that too. Something changed in his face. Not softness. Recognition. As if he understood the shape of a thing a person carried long after the world told her to put it down. She is not leaving this room, Luca said. Victor's expression sharpened. That would be unwise. No, Luca said. Letting a man close a folder after being questioned is unwise. The men by the wall adjusted without a sound. They did not crowd me. They did not touch Victor. They simply made the exits feel less available. Luca placed the pen farther away from the contract. Then he slid his empty hand across the table, palm up, toward Victor. The folder. Victor looked at that hand like it was a sentence. I realized then that Luca was not protecting me because he knew me. He was protecting the truth long enough to find out if I had given it to him. And somehow, that felt safer than pity. Victor's smile returned, but this time it did not reach any part of him. "You are making a mistake," he said. Luca's eyes stayed on the folder. "Then let the paper prove it." Victor looked at Luca's open hand for 1 second too long. That was when I knew he was afraid. Not panicked. Not guilty in a way a room could prove yet. But afraid enough that the mask no longer fit his face perfectly. He lifted the folder and placed it in Luca's palm. Carefully. Like the leather had teeth. Luca opened it without looking away from Victor. The top page was the clean English draft, all polished language and careful spacing. Beneath it were Victor's notes, the blue handwriting pressed hard enough into the paper to leave grooves. I could see the circled German phrase again. Besitzkontrolle. Then the softened words beside it. Temporary operational cooperation. My stomach twisted because there it was. Not the whole truth. Not enough to explain why he had done it. But enough to prove I had not invented the danger out of nerves or hunger or a desperate need to matter. Luca turned the folder slightly toward Mr. Adler. "Is this your language?" he asked. Victor cut in before the German buyer could answer. "This is inappropriate," he said. "These are internal translation notes. Draft language. Nothing binding. If every marginal note is treated like a conspiracy, no international deal on earth would survive 5 minutes." It was a good defense. That was the frightening part. He did not sound like a villain. He sounded like a professional correcting a misunderstanding. Calm suit. Clean hands. Educated voice. A man who knew rooms like this were built to believe him. Then he turned the room against me again. "And we should ask the obvious question," Victor said. "How does a waitress know exactly which clause to attack?" My breath caught. He saw it and pressed harder. "She hears one phrase. She interrupts at the signature line. She knows just enough German to create confusion. She points at my notes from across the room. That is not innocence. That is placement. Placement." The word landed heavy. I saw Luca's men look at me differently. Not with cruelty. With calculation. I had served their coffee. Walked behind their chairs. Heard names, ports, prices. To men like them, invisible was not harmless anymore. Invisible was access. Victor leaned closer to the table. "Who sent you, Mara?" No one had to touch me for me to feel cornered. Dennis whispered, "Oh God." Mr. Adler looked down at his water glass. And Luca Romano finally turned his full attention back to me. Not accusing. Waiting. That was worse in its own way, because he had given me a place to stand, and now I had to decide whether I could keep standing there while the floor burned. "No one sent me," I said. Victor smiled sadly, like he pitied how badly I was lying. "Then why were you listening?" "Because I was pouring espresso." "Why do you understand German?" "Because I studied it." "Where?" I hesitated. There were answers that sounded respectable. University. Program. Certification. Mine sounded like a life interrupted. Community college, I said. Then a scholarship track I didn't finish. Victor's eyes brightened. "There it is." The room seemed to lean toward him. A half-trained waitress with money problems hears a technical term and decides she can overrule a professional translator in front of one of the most powerful men in Chicago. My face burned so hot my eyes stung. Money problems. I wondered if he had guessed or if poverty simply showed on me. In the repaired hem of my blouse. In the shoes that shined only because I wiped them with napkins before every shift. In the way I stood like someone who could not afford to fall apart. Luca's voice cut through him. You keep describing her life. Not her translation. Victor stopped. Luca looked at me. Connect it. 2 words. Not kind. Not comforting. But clear. He had not asked me to defend my worth. He had asked me to connect the words. So I stepped closer to the table before fear could drag me backward. I pointed, not touching the paper. That phrase Mr. Adler used means possession control. Victor wrote it here, then translated it as temporary cooperation. Then when Mr. Adler asked why it had been changed, Victor answered before you could hear the question. Mr. Adler's fingers tightened around his glass. Luca noticed. So did Victor. Ask him, I said, my voice shaking now. Ask Mr. Adler what he meant when he asked, warum hat das geändert? The German buyer went pale enough that the chandelier light showed it. Victor's hand moved toward the folder again. This time, Luca closed it first. Not hard. Just final. Then he slid his phone onto the table and looked at Mr. Adler. No more interpreter, Luca said. One question. Direct answer. Victor's smile vanished. And I knew there was no way back from whatever came next. Luca tapped the screen of his phone once. Not hurried. Not angry. Just final. The soft click of the call connecting felt louder than every threat Victor had made. Mr. Adler stared at the phone like it had become a loaded weapon in the center of the table. Victor stood beside him with his shoulders squared, but his face had lost its polished warmth. Without the smile, he looked younger. Smaller. Meaner. Luca leaned forward. One question, he said. Mr. Adler nodded. Luca looked at me, not Victor. Tell me the exact English. My breath caught. For a second, I thought he meant the whole contract. The whole room. The whole weight of something I had no right to carry. Then I understood. He was not asking me to perform. He was letting me stand where Victor had tried to erase me. I looked at Mr. Adler. Ask him if the German clause gives his side temporary access or permanent possession control after the transfer begins. Luca repeated it into the phone, slow enough that every word had edges. Does the German clause give your side temporary access or permanent possession control after the transfer begins? No one moved. Even the sounds from the main restaurant seemed to fade behind the carved door. Mr. Adler swallowed. His eyes flicked to Victor, then away. Permanent possession control, he said. The words did not explode. They landed. Heavy. Clean. Undeniable. Luca's expression did not change, but the men around him did. One looked down at the contract as if it had become poisonous. Another shifted behind Victor, cutting off the space between him and the door. Dennis put one hand over his mouth. Victor gave a short laugh. Language can be interpreted, no, Luca said. One word, and Victor stopped breathing through the lie. Luca turned the folder around and laid it flat in front of Mr. Adler. This phrase, he said, pointing to the blue circle. Besitzcontrol. Your meaning. Mr. Adler's face tightened with shame. Possession control. Luca moved his finger to Victor's handwritten English note. His translation. Mr. Adler looked at it. Temporary operational cooperation, he read. The room felt the fraud before anyone named it. Victor's clean hands curled at his sides. You are making a business misunderstanding into a betrayal, he said. This is why translators are trusted to smooth language. If you want every blunt term dragged into English, you risk offending partners. Luca looked at him then. Truly looked. And I understood why men feared him. It was not the ring. Not the suit. Not the bodyguards by the wall. It was the control. The patience of a man who did not need to rush consequence because consequence was already waiting for his permission. You were not smoothing language, Luca said. You were moving ownership. Victor's mouth opened. Luca cut him off. And you used my table to do it. That was the first consequence. Not shouted. Not dramatic. But every man there understood it. Victor no longer belonged to the room he had tried to control. Luca closed the contract and slid it away from the signature line. The deal is suspended. Mr. Adler's shoulders dropped. He looked relieved and terrified at the same time. That was the second consequence. Millions of dollars stopped moving because a waitress had refused to swallow one sentence. Luca lifted his eyes to the man near the door. Victor does not leave with his phone, his access badge, or any copy of that folder. Victor went white. The third consequence stepped forward in a black suit and did not touch him yet. Then Luca looked at Dennis. My manager flinched like the order was a slap before it even arrived. You will not remove her from the schedule, Luca said. You will not discipline her. You will not make her apologize for saving my family from your guest's fraud. Dennis nodded so fast his chin shook. Yes, Mr. Romano. Of course. No, Luca said. Not of course. Say her name. Dennis turned toward me. For the first time all night, he looked at my face instead of my uniform. Mara, he said, voice thin. You won't be disciplined. It should not have mattered. It was not an apology. It did not fix the bills in my purse or the years I had spent shrinking myself into corners. But hearing my name in that room did something to me I was not ready for. It made the shame loosen. Just a little. Victor's eyes found mine then, and whatever mask he had left slipped. You have no idea what you interrupted, he said. Luca stood. The entire room seemed to lower itself around him. She knew exactly what she interrupted, he said. A lie. Then he picked up the pen he had almost used to sign away his family's control and placed it beside my tray on the sideboard. Not as a gift. As proof. The same pen that could have ended everything had stopped because I spoke. Luca's lawyer was called. Mr. Adler was told to remain. Victor's folder stayed open on the table, no longer hidden under his hand. And I stood there in my cheap shoes, with my cracked dictionary pressing against my hip, watching powerful men listen to the truth in a waitress's voice. By the time the private room emptied, the restaurant had almost closed. The main dining room was all half-lit booths and turned-over chairs. Somewhere in the kitchen, someone shut off the grill. The last espresso cup sat cold on my tray, untouched, a small brown moon at the bottom of porcelain. I should have gone downstairs. I should have clocked out, counted my tips, and checked whether my landlord had texted again. Instead, I stood beside the sideboard where Luca Romano's pen still lay next to my tray, and I tried to understand how a room that had nearly swallowed me could feel so quiet afterward. The oak door opened. Luca came back alone. No men behind him. No Victor. No folder under anyone's hand. Just Luca Romano in his black suit, holding something small and blue. My dictionary. For one awful second, I thought I had dropped it and he was returning proof of how pathetic I was. The cracked spine. The bent corners. The coffee stain across the cover from a morning when I had studied vocabulary on the bus because my car would not start. He held it carefully, like it was not cheap at all. This fell from your apron, he said. I took it from him with both hands. Thank you. No, he said. I should be thanking you. My throat tightened, and I hated that it did. Men like him were not supposed to sound human. They were supposed to stay in the dark wood and amber light, making decisions that changed lives without ever noticing the people carrying plates around them. But he looked at my dictionary, then at me. Mara, he said, and my name did not sound small in his mouth. You saved my family from a mistake I would not have forgiven myself for making. I looked down because being seen that directly felt almost harder than being dismissed. I just translated a sentence. You chose to speak when everyone in that room gave you a reason not to. The words reached a place in me I had kept locked for years. The girl who left school. The daughter who stopped dreaming because medicine, rent, and groceries had become louder than any future. The waitress who learned to smile through being unseen. Luca slid the pen closer to me, then stopped before it touched my hand. Dennis has been told your job is safe, he said. And if you want to finish what you started with German, I know people who can open that door. No debt. No leash. Your choice. No leash. That was why I believed him. Not because he was powerful. Because he gave the decision back to me. I looked at the cracked dictionary in my hands. For the first time in years, it did not feel like proof of what I had lost. It felt like proof that I had not lost myself. So I nodded once. Not yes to him. Yes to the part of me that had survived long enough to be heard. And when I walked out of Romano's that night, I was still a waitress. But I was not invisible anymore.